From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
History had me glued to the seat. And this little girl said, "How is that?" I said, "Do you know what it felt like?" I said, it felt like Harriet Tubman's hands were pushing me down on one shoulder. And Sojourner Truth's hand was pushing me down on another shoulder.
As Women's History Month comes to a close, we're joined by a woman some call the other Rosa Parks. 9 months before Parks refused to give up her bus seat to a white passenger in Montgomery, Alabama, a 15-year-old teenager named Claudette Colvin did the very same thing. She was arrested. It was her case that led to the Supreme Court decision to desegregate Alabama's bus system. Claudette Colvin joins us today for a rare interview. But first, as President Obama calls on Congress to pass new gun control legislation, we'll look at how the Obama administration and the National Rifle Association are attempting to weaken international arms treaty at the UN.
The U.S. buys and sells almost as much weaponry as the rest of the world combined. So what happens in the U.S. is going to have enormous impact on the rest of the world.
We'll speak with Andrew Feinstein, author of The Shadow World, Inside the Global Arms Trade. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A proposed global arms treaty is stalled in talks at the United Nations. On Thursday, Iran, Syria, and North Korea blocked adoption of the first international pact to regulate the arms trade, citing failure to ban weapons sales to armed rebel groups. Despite the three countries' objections, the treaty is expected to come up for a vote in the General Assembly next week. The UN talks mark the latest effort to craft a global standard for regulating the arms trade after the Obama administration blocked an agreement last summer. We'll have more on the story after headlines. Tensions are continuing to mount between the U.S. and North Korea. The North Korean regime says it's ordered its rocket units on standby for an attack on regional U.S. military bases after the U.S. flew nuclear-capable stealth bombers over South Korea. It was the latest threat by North Korea in the standoff over U.S.-South Korean military drills and U.S.-backed Security Council sanctions in response to North Korea's recent nuclear test. On Thursday, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel rejected assertions South Korea flights are a provocation.
We have security issues here that we have to protect and commitments and our security interests. So, no, I don't think we're doing anything extraordinary or provocative or out of the out of the orbit of what nations do to protect their own interests and assure, as the general said, especially not only to our South Korean ally, but to our other allies in that region, that we must make clear that these provocations by the North are taken by us very seriously, and we'll respond to that. Police
in Connecticut have unsealed key findings of their investigation into the shooting massacre at Newtown's Sandy Hook Elementary School. The gunman, Adam Lanza, had a massive arsenal of weapons at home, including swords, knives, and guns. Other findings at Lanza's home included a newspaper clipping of another school shooting, several books on autism, a report card from when he attended Sandy Hook, and a certificate from the National Rifle Association bearing Lanza's name. He used 30-round magazines to fire 154 times at Sandy Hook, killing 26 people in less than 5 minutes. In a statement, Connecticut Governor Dannel Malloy said the fact Lanza opted for the high-capacity magazines instead of the smaller ones he had at home underscores the need for an assault weapons ban. President Obama invoked Newtown at a news conference Thursday to reaffirm his push for gun control legislation on Capitol Hill, flanked by a group of gun control activists, including mothers who've lost children to shootings. Obama said, quote, "Shame on us if we've forgotten the Newtown victims." Obama vowed to continue his efforts despite heavy opposition from gun control foes.
Some powerful voices on the other side that are interested in running out the clock or changing the subject or drowning out the majority of the American people to prevent any of these reforms from happening at all. They're doing everything they can to make all our progress collapse under the weight of fear and frustration, or their assumption is that people will just forget about it.
The Senate is facing an upcoming vote on a new gun control law. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid has already excluded an assault weapons ban from the overall legislation, but it could still come up for a vote as an amendment. Defense attorneys for hunger-striking prisoners at Guantanamo are accusing military officials of imposing harsh conditions in a bid to halt their protest. An emergency motion filed in federal court says guards are denying prisoners water and keeping camp temperatures extremely frigid to increase their discomfort. The prisoners have refused food for nearly 2 months over intrusive searches and their continued detention without charge. At least 3 prisoners were hospitalized for dehydration earlier this week. The allegations come as the International Committee of the Red Cross has begun a fact-finding mission at Guantanamo to evaluate conditions for the hunger-striking prisoners. The Environmental Protection Agency is set to unveil new federal standards today for cleaner gasoline in vehicles. The rules will reduce sulfur in gasoline by 2/3 and impose pollution limits on all cars by 2017. The Obama administration says the standards will be equal to taking 33 million cars off the roads. They've been held up for well over a year amidst political opposition led by oil industry lobbyists. At least 16 congressional Democrats have signed on to a Republican demand for the rules to be delayed. 15 people were killed in Syria Thursday when bombs hit a building on the campus of Damascus University. The Syrian government says all the victims were students, blaming rebels for the attack. The UN Security Council has approved a new military force to launch operations against rebel groups in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The force's mandate is unprecedented and explicitly prescribing offensive capability to a peacekeeping force under the United Nations. The force would target the rebel M23 and other groups operating in the DRC's border regions with Rwanda and Uganda. A Bahraini court has cleared 21 medics charged and in some cases jailed for treating demonstrators during anti-government protests 2 years ago. The medics were swept up in the U.S.-backed monarchy's crackdown on political opposition, sparking an international outcry. 3 medics arrested in the case remain behind bars. Concern is growing for the health of former South African President Nelson Mandela after his hospitalization for a lung infection. Mandela spent a second night in the hospital Thursday, his 3rd hospital admission in 4 months. At the White House, President Obama extended his well wishes for Mandela's recovery.
Obviously, we're all deeply concerned with Nelson Mandela's health. He's a hero, I think, to all of us. I'm sure that I speak for the other leaders here. We will be keeping him in our thoughts and prayers and his entire family. He is as strong physically as he's been in character and in leadership over so many decades. And hopefully he will come out of this latest challenge.
The South African government says Mandela is in good spirits and is making progress. The nation's largest labor unions here say they've made progress in behind-the-scenes talks on the status of foreign guest workers as part of overall immigration reform. The AFL-CIO and other groups are taking part in negotiations on the pending immigration overhaul undertaken by a bipartisan group in the Senate. A dispute between unions and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on pay for immigrant guest workers in low-wage jobs has reportedly held up talks over the past week. The two sides have now apparently settled on a solution to establish a wage standard similar to current U.S. law. A U.S. Army veteran has been detained on charges of fighting alongside an al-Qaeda group battling Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The soldier, Eric Haroun, reportedly took part in attacks on Assad's forces earlier this year. He was arrested after returning to the United States. Dozens of protesters marched on government buildings in Detroit Thursday to oppose the appointment of emergency managers across Michigan. The rally came one day after a coalition of civil rights and religious groups filed a lawsuit challenging emergency managers in Detroit and 5 other Michigan cities. The managers are granted broad powers, including overruling elected officials, in a bid to turn around struggling finances. The new lawsuit accuses Michigan's controversial emergency manager law of imposing a new form of government in the state. The emergency manager law has disproportionately affected African Americans, with over half of African Americans in Michigan now living under unelected leadership. Speaking at the federal courthouse in Detroit, the Reverend Al Sharpton called the Michigan issue a national struggle.
This is a local issue, but a national struggle. What Governor Snyder has done is nullify the voters of this city and interposed his own will, something that Dr. Martin Luther King spoke against 50 years ago this year.
Detroit's new emergency manager, Kevin Orr, began his tenure this week. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I am Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.
Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.